Language can form anything. The new realm of possibility or kingdom of heaven. Language can form anything. The sequence of how this proceeds simply flows from nothing. There's no getting to nothing first. There's no clearing other things away and only then beginning. There's simply nothing. When there's already nothing, then there's nothing to fix or change. There's no standard for how to judge or evaluate success or failure. There's simply a sequence of proceedings with no particular boundary between one proceeding and the next. However, there's clearly language happening. If there were not already language happening, then there might actually be nothing to do. And without language already being here, there would certainly be nothing to say about the fact that only nothing is already here, along with language, obviously. So here is nothing, and part of that nothing is language. By the way, language means nothing. Language is not going to eventually mean something. Language is just a sequence of codes, often in sound, for the directing of attention. By the way, attention is also nothing. Attention is simply a context in which for the perception of something to arise. Language, of course, is simply one form of something, and all forms of something are essentially nothing. Language directs attention to perceive some particular something as the sound of these words, and it's a code and it's meaningful. It's not nothing, it's something. Well, it's still nothing. Even when it is something, it's still fundamentally nothing. Nothing simply means nothing in particular. Fundamentally, there's nothing in particular. Language can concentrate attention to some particular thing, but there's still nothing in particular. There's really language moving, attention moving. What is attention? It's just language anyway, right? Or is it? What is more fundamental, attention or language? Nothing is most fundamental. It's a trick question to say which is more fundamental, language or attention. It doesn't matter. Nothing is the fundamental. I was going to say something, but that would be a contradiction, wouldn't it? Nothing is fundamental. Language is happening. Nothing simply means no thing in particular, no particular thing. Nothing in this case does not mean the absence of something. That's mere somethinglessness. Like if you have a cup and there's nothing in the cup, that means that there's not something in the cup. I'm not talking about that nothing. I'm talking about nothing. Nothing is actually beyond the realm of anything, of any something. And yet, nothing includes not only every single something of perception, but the possibility of perception itself, and even the possibility of anything. Any something is only nothing, too. You can't get away from the fact that everything's fundamentally nothing. Anything is fundamentally nothing. Any something is fundamentally nothing. And language isolates a particular sub-pattern of nothing as some particular thing in language that's labeled that. So there's patterns of perceiving, but then we label them. And that labeling is when something happens, because somebody labels something and says, okay, there's the thing I labeled, and there's me over here, the one labeling it, and there's a relationship. And all of a sudden, there's two things. There's the thing out there, and then the thing in here that does the labeling. Any something is only nothing, too. Even the one doing the labeling, that's fundamentally nothing. The thing labeled, that's fundamentally nothing. Different words, the labels, they're fundamentally nothing, really. Different words are distinct, just as different letters are distinct. However, even though other words can be used to describe words, you can define them with a list of other words and say, okay, green, it means the color in the spectrum between yellow and blue. Okay, fine, but it's useful, but words are referenced by other words. That's actually really weird. There's nothing to define words except other words. So words can be used to describe words, to define words, like sound and shape. We can delineate. Here's the word the, and here's the word the. What's the difference? One spelled T-H-E and one spelled T-H-E-E. They sound the same, but they're shaped differently if you write them down, because one has that extra E shape of that alphanumeric shape thing that goes at the end of the T-H-E, E. So all those are just variations on nothing at all. Doesn't matter. A word like shape only means something in particular through perception. Perception points back to attention. But even perception and even attention, they're just concepts. Concepts are linguistic formations. They're from out of nothing that linguistic formations are happening, like this one now, and this one, and the next one, and all of them. All these linguistic formations are happening out of nothing. They are nothing, and attention is moving, and perceiving is happening, and linguistic formations are doing, or happening, or whatever. So nothing itself is the capacity for linguistic formations to simply happen by themselves. Linguistic formations just proceed in a sequence of expressions of nothing. Language is the expression of nothing. From out of nothing, nothing expresses itself through language. The language is still the nothing. However, any language is also a specific set of distinct, isolated formations. By the way, language itself is infinite, though any particular language might distinguish itself from other finite languages. Because we can say, oh, here's the boundary. All this is this language. Anything else is not. That's over there, that's the other language. And way over there, that's the third language. So, of course, the boundaries between particular languages, they're actually nothing. One language evolves into another, with perhaps an entire family, like branches of a tree's trunk, right? Perhaps an entire family of languages being similar to each other. They have a common root or a common trunk or whatever, and they branch out and they have different variations, and some are more in the south and some are more in the south. That's right, they're more in the south, while some are more in the north. What would be, how do you do the accent from Boston? I can do like New Yorker. Some are more from the north, okay? That's the best I got. All right. I could try my Wisconsin accent, except I can't remember. How's that go? I don't know. All right, but there are different branches, like of a tree, that go in different directions, like languages like that, with different dialects and different, spinning off of like High German instead of Middle German or Low German, and then you get like that blend of a little of this and a little of that. Now you got Creole or Cajun or Arcadian or whatever, right? It's got some French in it. It's got some, I don't even know what in it, right? It's like a recipe, like you mix a couple different ingredients, and it's very exciting. So languages mix and influence each other. Languages may be called distinct, but the boundaries between them shift. If the boundaries shift, then the boundaries are arbitrary. They're nothing. In fact, the alleged boundaries between various languages are alive, existing only through the declaration of language to say, here's the boundary of this language from another. Here's the boundary of English. Oh, this is British English, and this is American English, and this is Southern English, and this is New Yorker English, and this is ghetto English, and this is suburban English, and downtown English, and West Side English, and Australian English, and all these different Englishes. How many different Englishes are there? 407. That's right, 407 different Englishes. Exactly. That's exactly the right number. Oh, one of them just one of the last speakers of the 407th kind of English just died right then. Did you notice that? Now there's only 406 kinds of English left. But somebody just made a new kind. There's 407 again. Very reassuring. So that's how it goes. There's no specific number of English languages. You can't refine the categorical boundary of one language to another and how many different languages of English are there. It's arbitrary. It's nothing. Language can divide itself into dialects. Different dialects can be subdivided further. All of them are variations of nothing at all. Is Creole a language? Clearly, it is entirely composed of other languages. Like Esperanto, it's entirely composed of other languages. However, it is also not a specific dialect of any particular language. So what is it? Is it a language? Is it a dialect? Is it an accent? It's whatever it's called. There's no specific boundary between language, dialect, and so on. These are all arbitrary boundaries. They're very useful. We're clear that they're, are like, if we list 20 things, some of them are going to be clearly dialects, relatively speaking. Some of them are going to be clearly languages, relatively speaking. And some stuff's going to be a little bit harder to position on that spectrum as to whether it's clearly one thing or clearly something else, or it's pretty much in the middle. So language is the mechanism. Oh, I skipped something. Many words in one language have roots or ancestors that pass through a set of other languages. One ancient word can have a huge number of descendants in a variety of languages that formed subsequently as variations and expansions of the single ancient language in that single word. And yoga is the word I think to make reference to, because yoga, a Sanskrit word, thousands of years old, is the origin of the word yoke, like that's put on oxen. I don't know if it's the origin of the word yolk, like egg yolk, but it's the origin of the word yoke. It's the origin of the word link, logos, leg, things that connect stuff. A leg connects one thing to another. Ligament, lexicon, law, the word law, logos, link, joint, conjugate, junction. All those come from yoga. Joint, junction, conjugate, those all derive from yoga. It means where stuff overlap, where there's a unity or something along those lines, a union. It's yoga. And there's all sorts of words in English and other languages that are all derived from yoga, including, as I said, yoke, like a yoke that goes on the back of a ox. It's the connecting thing. Ligament, link, language. The word language actually is derived from the word yoga. So language is the mechanism by which the various expressions of nothing can be distinguished. They're not really separate, but they can be distinguished. You have overlapping categories and subcategories and blurry boundaries between categories, but language is a real functional something based on a foundation of nothing. So without language, everything is the exact same nothing. That is, there is only nothing and not a single other thing, a concept of an isolated something. Those concepts of an isolated something, they come to us through labeling, which is a function of language. That's the operating of language, is labeling. So that fundamental nothing is somethinglessness. Remember I made reference to, you have a cup, there's air inside of it, and we call that nothing because there's no liquid in it, right, or no sand filling the cup, and we say there's nothing in it. Well, that's a somethinglessness. But to even use a term like somethinglessness, or to use language at all, is no longer only nothing. It's nothing in motion. It's the moving of consciousness. It's the moving of attention. It's the moving of language, or the moving of consciousness and attention as language. So with language, while there is still, of course, nothing, fundamentally, there's also anything and everything. Any number of particular somethings. Language has nothing, something, anything, everything, that thing, this thing, those things, groups of somethings, all those nothings. You can group nothings. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but language doesn't have to make sense. You can have nonsense in language. Those particular somethings are all expressions of nothing, are all expressions of language. Those somethings do not eliminate the fundamental nothing. They're in fact nothing itself, but with distinct forms recognizable in language. So we put a label of something over the top of nothing, and we say, okay, here's a boundary, and we're going to call this boundary of nothing the visible spectrum of light. Well, that's arbitrary and artificial, but we'll go with it. There's a visible spectrum of light. How many different colors are there? 7. There's violet, then there's blue, then there's green, then there's yellow, then there's orange, then there's red. There you go. Is that 7? And then purple. Whatever. So however many colors there are, that's not really fundamentally how many colors there are. It's like, is there 407 or 406 different kinds of English? No. The answer is whatever. You can subdivide language into however many subcategories you want. You can subdivide colors into 6 colors. You can subdivide colors into 24 colors. You get you go into 3rd grade out of kindergarten. You advance a few years later. You're in 3rd grade, and they give you that big box crayons, 12, 24 crayons, 48 different colors of crayons. How many colors are there? How many you name? Colors are a category in language. So when you have a rainbow, you can divide it into 6 parts and say, here's the 6 parts of that spectrum. Or you can add like gray and brown and all these things. You can say, okay, there's 64 million colors, or there's 256 colors. A graphic designer or an interior designer that has colors like eggshell and cream and all these different off-whites, they're all just off-white to me. But to them, no, they're 12 different or 400 different kinds of off-white. And you just got to get all the distinctions of all the different kinds of off-white. And it depends on if you have natural lighting or, dimmed candles, or, what kind of, is it metallic dust in the paint, or is it enamel paint, or is it oil-based paint, or is it crayon, or is it, there's all these different kinds of colors because there's all these different kinds of reflecting of light. There's different brightness, there's different hues, different shades, different pigments, different colors. It's all nothing. With language, there's still nothing, and then there's a bunch of something superimposed over the fundamental nothing. And those superimposings of something are all arbitrary. They're meaningless, and they're very useful. So those somethings, those labelings of nothing, don't eliminate nothing. It just labels and specifies a particular portion of nothing. And those specific portions of nothing are still nothing, but with distinct subcategories of nothing, recognizable in language. For instance, is there such a thing as I or me? In many languages, there is such a thing as I, or similar concepts to the concept of I. In fact, in all 406 official English languages, there is a concept of I. But I can make up some other language and say, okay, there's no I in that language. However, I is fundamentally a concept. It's a label in language, a construct of language, merely a thing. I'm talking about the word I. I is not itself fundamental. And that's the ancient teaching called anatma. It means that the self or the I or the me isn't a fundamental something. It's just a wave on the larger ocean. It's like a wave on the larger ocean. There's nothing especially definitive about the boundary of the I. Where does one I begin and where does it end? If I'm driving a car and I say, oh, that guy almost hit me, do I mean he almost hit what? The car? My face, what did he almost hit? I is not a something fundamentally. It's nothing fundamentally. There's just a label on top of that fundamental nothing. So that's the teaching of Anatma. Only nothing itself is fundamental. Or we could say only life itself is fundamental. That's fine. I is just a particular pattern of perception. When sleeping is happening, there's no I happening. I is just a particular pattern of perception, perceiving through an I, an ego. A pattern of language, neurological processing called I. It's just a pattern of perception, a structure or habit of language. I is a subcategory within language. It's a specific thing within language. It's a type of nothing. It's an instance of language. Language is more fundamental than I, and nothing is more fundamental than language.